My fiancée slept with my brother a week before our wedding while I was paying off her debt, so I vanished without a word and watched her crumble. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and I thought I'd finally found someone who understood me. After years of jumping from one failed relationship to another, I met Claire, and everything clicked toward, at least. That's what I told myself. She had this way of lighting up a room, laughing like she meant it, and somehow she made me feel like my quiet, responsible nature was exactly what the world needed. I was hardworking, loyal, and maybe a little too trusting. But with her, it felt natural to give, to care, to plan a life together. I wanted stability, and she seemed to want the same. Claire was charming in a way that made people like her immediately. She had this bubbly energy, the kind that could turn a dreary Tuesday into something special. But she had financial habits that worried me. Not habits I could change with a conversation, just reckless spending that always seemed to follow her smile. Early on, I found myself paying off small debts. Helping her manage bills, she insisted she totally had under control. But I didn't mind. Honestly, I thought of it as an investment in us, in a life we were building together. We spent weekends hunting for apartments, talking about dream kitchens, vacations we'd take when we finally got our footing. She'd throw her head back, laughing at the smallest jokes I made, and I'd think, this is it. This is love. I'd stay up late to help her pay off a missed bill, walk her through budgeting when she panicked over overdrafts. And she always thanked me with that soft, slightly shy smile that made me melt. It felt like teamwork, like we were building something real. There were small moments that should have set off alarms, like the time she laughed off a friend's comment. He's too generous. You're lucky he puts up with you, and she shrugged, saying, they just don't get me. I remember thinking it was harmless, a throwaway remark. Maybe it was, at least at the time, by the time we started planning our wedding. I was completely invested, both emotionally and financially. I was picking venues, coordinating dates, dreaming of the life we'd live. I felt this warmth in my chest, this certainty that everything was perfect. But underneath all the excitement, there was a flicker of unease, a tiny whisper I shoved aside because I was in love. I didn't know it yet, but the cracks in Claire's loyalty were already forming in. I was blissfully unaware. I knew something was slightly off. Though I couldn't put my finger on it, Claire had started disappearing for short stretches during the week, claiming errands or catching up with old friends. But the timing always seemed ... odd. I trusted her completely. So I brushed it off, telling myself that everyone deserves a little space, that maybe I was just being paranoid. Still, a knot in my stomach began to grow whenever she laughed a little too long at her phone, or when she'd suddenly tuck it into her bag whenever I walked into the room. It wasn't just her behavior that unsettled me. My brother, Jake, had always been around, the golden child of our family. Charismatic, effortlessly charming, the guy everyone seemed to like. I'd never thought twice about him being around Claire, but lately, something felt different. They shared these inside jokes, subtle glances, little exchanges that made me pause. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it, that my own insecurities were flaring up. Meanwhile, Claire's financial requests were escalating. She needed me to cover a few more bills, a late payment here, a forgotten subscription there. She framed it as future security, a necessary step toward our life together. And I, ever the loyal partner, agreed. Each time I reminded myself I was supporting someone I loved, that it would all be worth it in the end. But there was a growing tension between her bubbly charm and these little pressures that I couldn't quite reconcile. One evening, I caught a glimpse of a text on her phone while she was laughing at something with Jake. I don't know why I looked. Maybe intuition, maybe paranoia, but there it was, a message that made my chest tighten. It was innocent enough on the surface, just teasing, but the tone, the frequency, the timing, something about it didn't sit right. When I asked her casually, she waved it off with a smile. Oh, don't be silly. It's nothing. Just a joke. I wanted to believe her. By the end of that week, the unease had grown into a low hum in the back of my mind. My excitement for the wedding was still there, but it was tinged with doubt, with a feeling I couldn't shake. Something was happening behind my back. I didn't yet know what or how badly it would hurt when. I finally found out. The financial strain was starting to weigh on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was putting in longer hours at work, skipping lunches, even passing on small vacations I'd promised myself, all to cover Claire's mounting debts. Each time she smiled at me with that half-apologetic, half-grateful look, I felt a rush of love and pride, like I was the hero of our story. But somewhere beneath that, a seed of exhaustion and doubt was taking root. I began noticing little inconsistencies in her stories. An extra errand here, a friend she needed to meet there. I wanted to trust her, but the knot in my stomach kept tightening. Jake, my brother, became more of a presence in our lives during this time. He'd pop in unexpectedly, linger longer than necessary, and offer advice on everything from her bills to our wedding plans. At first, I appreciated the help, but then came the inside jokes that excluded me, the way Claire's laughter seemed just a little too loud when she was around him, and the subtle glances that made my heart sink with unspoken suspicion. I wanted to confront her, to ask what was going on, but I didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling. There were moments when I would catch Claire rolling her eyes at small inconveniences, sighing when I reminded her about deadlines or bills. She'd murmur under her breath, "You're too generous sometimes. Maybe that's why they say I'm lucky." I laughed it off each time, convincing myself she was just venting in the way couples do. I was emotionally invested, so invested that I could ignore these tiny red flags. Convincing myself love meant sacrifice, meant trust, meant blind faith in the person I'd chosen to spend my life with. One night, I stayed late at the office, returning to find Claire gone. Her car was in the driveway, but the house was quiet. I noticed Jake's jacket hanging by the door, unfamiliar scent lingering faintly in the air. It was subtle, almost dismissible, but I couldn't shake it. My chest tightened. The excitement and joy I had felt about our wedding were now tinged with a persistent dread, a nagging worry that something had shifted behind my back. As I went to bed that night, the familiar warmth I used to feel in our apartment was gone, replaced by an uneasy silence. I told myself I was imagining things, that love meant trust, but deep down. A warning bell was ringing, and I had no idea how right it was. Something was brewing, something that would change everything. The closer we got to the wedding, the more I felt the tension creeping into our lives. It was supposed to be the most exciting week of our lives, finalizing the venue, tasting the cake, sending out last-minute invitations, but instead, I felt a gnawing unease. Claire was distant, distracted, and whenever I tried to talk about the wedding, she'd brush it off with a laugh or a quick excuse. "Don't stress, everything's fine," she'd say, but her eyes darted elsewhere, her attention clearly elsewhere. The warmth I'd once felt around her was fraying at the edges. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Jake's presence became almost unbearable. He showed up unannounced at the apartment, offering help that always seemed unnecessary. Claire would light up when he was around, laughing at jokes I didn't understand, leaning in closer than usual. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was just being friendly, that maybe I was overreacting. But the little moments piled up, the way she lingered when he left, the hushed laughter they shared. The way my questions were met with vague responses or nervous smiles, the financial stress wasn't helping either. I was juggling my own expenses with hers, paying off debts I wasn't sure I should have, and worrying about whether everything would be ready for the wedding. And still, she acted as if nothing was wrong. Once, while I was reviewing the guest list, she casually said, "Your friends don't get why I need you to handle all this, you know? They say you're too generous." It was meant to be playful, but I felt a pang of shame and frustration. How had my love for her become something people judged me for? Late at night, I started noticing the small cracks. A text message flashing on her phone she quickly silenced. Her sudden urgency to leave the apartment for a walk, Jake's jacket left hanging near the door when I wasn't home. I wanted to confront her, to demand honesty, but fear and hope held me back. I kept telling myself love required trust, that I shouldn't let paranoia ruin everything I'd worked for that night. As I lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of our apartment, I felt an icy knot in my stomach. Something had shifted. I didn't yet know what it was, but I sensed the calm before a storm, a storm that would hit harder than I could imagine. And when it came, nothing would ever be the same. The closer we got to the wedding, the more I felt the tension creeping into our lives. It was supposed to be the most exciting week of our lives, finalizing the venue, tasting the cake, sending out last-minute invitations, but instead, I felt a gnawing unease. Claire was distant, distracted, and whenever I tried to talk about the wedding, she'd brush it off with a laugh or a quick excuse. "Don't stress, everything's fine," she'd say, but her eyes darted elsewhere, her attention clearly elsewhere. The warmth I'd once felt around her was fraying at the edges, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Jake's presence became almost unbearable. He showed up unannounced at the apartment, offering help that always seemed unnecessary. Claire would light up when he was around, laughing at jokes I didn't understand, leaning in closer than usual. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was just being friendly, that maybe I was overreacting. But the little moments piled up, the way she lingered when he left, the hushed laughter they shared. The way my questions were met with vague responses or nervous smiles, the financial stress wasn't helping either. I was juggling my own expenses with hers, paying off debts I wasn't sure I should have, worrying about whether everything would be ready for the wedding. And still, she acted as if nothing was wrong. Once, while I was reviewing the guest list, she casually said, "Your friends don't get why I need you to handle all this, you know? They say you're too generous." It was meant to be playful, but I felt a pang of shame and frustration. How had my love for her become something people judged me for? Late at night, I started noticing the small cracks. A text message flashing on her phone she quickly silenced. Her sudden urgency to leave the apartment for a walk, Jake's jacket left hanging near the door when I wasn't home. I wanted to confront her, to demand honesty, but fear and hope held me back. I kept telling myself, love required trust, that I shouldn't let paranoia ruin everything I'd worked for. That night, as I lay awake listening to the quiet hum of our apartment, I felt an icy knot in my stomach. Something had shifted. I didn't yet know what it was, but I sensed the calm before a storm that would hit harder than I could imagine. And when it came, nothing would ever be the same. I will never forget that Thursday night, the night everything changed. I came home from work, exhausted from another 12-hour day, but looking forward to seeing Claire, maybe even talking through the unease that had been gnawing at me all week. The apartment was quiet when I walked in, the faint scent of her perfume lingering, but there was something off. Too quiet. My heart thumped in my chest as I called her name softly. Claire. No answer. Then I saw it. Her phone lying face down on the counter, a notification glowing faintly. I picked it up, almost hesitating, and my stomach sank. There, in plain sight, were messages between her and Jake, flirty, intimate, casual, like they'd been doing this for weeks. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and a bitter taste rose in my throat. I scrolled further and found photos, texts, little inside jokes that weren't meant for me. My brain screamed, my heart shattered, but my body froze. I remember sitting on the couch, staring at the screen, trying to convince myself it was a mistake, that maybe I was misreading it. But the truth hit harder than anything I could have imagined. The woman I loved, the woman I'd been sacrificing everything for, had slept with my brother. A week before our wedding, while I had been working overtime, paying off her debts, building the life we'd dreamed of, every late night, every skipped meal, every worry I'd shouldered it, all meant nothing to her. When she finally walked through the door, I couldn't even look at her. "Hey, I thought you'd be home earlier," she said, smiling nervously. I swallowed hard, my voice trembling. "Claire, what is this?" I held up her phone, letting the screen glow between us. She froze, the smile vanishing. "I can explain," she stammered. But how could she explain betrayal? How could anyone explain choosing my brother over me? I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I couldn't. All I could do was feel the betrayal burn through every fiber of my being. And then, almost instinctively, I made a decision that would change everything. I turned, walked out the door, and vanished without a word. I left behind the wedding, the apartment, the life I'd been building, and for the first time in my life, I felt a grim sense of control. As I stepped into the night, my chest aching and hands trembling. I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the victim. But I also knew that leaving them in ignorance would be far more devastating than any confrontation. And so I disappeared silently, leaving Claire and Jake to face the storm they had brewed in. I watched, knowing the fallout would be explosive. I didn't look back as I walked away that night. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement, and each step felt heavier than the last. But there was a strange clarity in my mind. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't trying to placate anyone, fix anyone, or pretend everything was fine. I was leaving behind betrayal, lies, and the life I thought I deserved. It was terrifying, but it was also the first time I felt free. I spent the next few days quietly disappearing from everything that tied me to them. I changed my routines, avoided the places we used to go together, even paused social media updates that might give them a hint of where I was. Claire called me relentlessly, texting and leaving messages, each one dripping with panic and confusion. "Where are you? Please answer me." I thought we were building a life together, but I didn't respond. I let the phone sit untouched, watching her anxiety grow from a safe distance. Jake, of course, was flustered too. I could see it through mutual friends and snippets of overheard conversations. He didn't know whether to reach out, apologize, or cover his tracks. Their entire world had shifted in an instant, but only because I chose to step away. For the first time, I held the power that had been stripped from me for so long, and it was intoxicating. I remember sitting on a park bench one evening, the wind brushing against my face, the city buzzing quietly around me, and feeling the weight of what had happened. Betrayal cuts deep, deeper than I ever imagined. But watching them scramble, watching the carefully constructed facades crumble, gave me a sense of justice that words could never capture. I wasn't seeking revenge, at least, not directly, but the universe had a way of balancing things when I refused to play along anymore. Even now, I felt a mix of sorrow and satisfaction. I mourned the life I'd thought we'd have, but I reveled in the quiet collapse of their trust and comfort. And I knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that this was just the beginning of the fallout. 1 week later, and I could already see cracks widening in their perfect little world, and I would be there, silently observing every step of the way. Watching Claire and Jake unravel from a distance was both haunting and oddly satisfying. I had chosen to disappear completely, leaving them in ignorance, and the effect was immediate. Friends who had once admired our relationship started noticing the tension, whispering behind their backs about the strange absence of the groom-to-be. Claire tried to maintain control, plastering a forced smile on her face at gatherings and over calls. But every misstep, every slip, was amplified by my silence. I could see her panic radiating in every interaction, carefully crafted charm faltering under pressure. Jake wasn't faring much better. He had always relied on charm to deflect blame, but without me there as the buffer, the subtle manipulations he counted on began to backfire. Mutual friends started questioning him, noticing the odd chemistry that had once seemed harmless. I had no doubt they were blaming each other, pointing fingers quietly, while I remained completely removed from the chaos. There was a perverse satisfaction in knowing they were experiencing the consequences of their choices without me having to raise a finger. I remember walking past our favorite coffee shop one afternoon, hearing Claire's voice from the distance, sharp and strained, as she argued with Jake about some minor wedding detail. The sound of her voice went so comforting, felt alien now, edged with desperation and guilt. I paused across the street, watching as she stumbled through explanations, pleading for cooperation while he shrugged and avoided responsibility. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. They had treated my loyalty as a given, and now that it was gone, the world they had counted on for support was collapsing around them. Even as I observed, a part of me felt a pang of sorrow. I had loved her once, trusted her completely, and sacrificed for her happiness. But that was gone. Watching her unravel without me there, powerless to soothe or fix her, was the ultimate poetic justice. And yet, I remained distant, a silent observer, knowing that the worst was yet to come. As the week dragged on, I could see the cracks deepen, the small lies, the hidden mistakes, the mounting tension, and in my chest, there was a quiet certainty. When everything finally fell apart, it would hit harder than either of them could imagine. By the time the weekend rolled around, Claire had hit her lowest point, and the sight of it was almost surreal. Friends and family were beginning to notice her frantic energy, the way she double-checked everything, stumbled over explanations, and snapped at anyone who asked questions. She was unraveling in real time, the facade of control she'd held up for so long crumbling with every conversation. I could see the desperation in her eyes even from afar. She had no idea where I was. No clue how much she had actually lost, and no way to repair the damage she'd caused. Jake, too, was faltering. The charm he'd relied on was failing. People were starting to notice his evasiveness, the excuses piling up, the uncomfortable silence that replaced his usual confidence. He looked smaller, somehow, diminished by the very betrayal that had once seemed inconsequential. I heard snippets from mutual friends' snide remarks, questioning glances, hushed gossip, and each one felt like confirmation that the universe was finally balancing the scales. They had underestimated the cost of their actions, and now it was hitting them both. I won't lie. Seeing them suffer sparked a mix of satisfaction and guilt inside me. I had loved Claire once, trusted her completely, and given everything I had to support her dreams and her stability. And yet here she was, broken, frantic, realizing too late that her choices had consequences. The heartbreak of betrayal had been mine. Now, I was watching it reflected back on them, amplified by their own recklessness. I remember sitting in a small cafe, the scent of coffee thick in the air, and watching Claire pace across the street, phone in hand, tears welling in her eyes. The city noise faded around me, replaced by the silence of my resolve. I had done nothing directly to hurt them, yet the quiet devastation that surrounded them felt like a mirror of the pain they had caused me. That night, as I walked home under the dim streetlights, I realized I was witnessing the final stages of their collapse. And deep down, I knew the hardest part was over, but the ultimate reckoning, the one that would cement the lessons they had ignored, was still yet to unfold. I finally decided it was time to confront them, but on my terms. I didn't need to yell, to cry, or to beg for an explanation. Those days were over. I chose a quiet evening, when the tension in the air was already thick, and let them know I was back, calmly, deliberately. Claire froze the second she saw me, her phone slipping from her fingers, eyes wide with shock. Jake's confident posture faltered. The charm that usually carried him through awkward situations, completely gone. "Where have you been?" Claire demanded, her voice trembling despite the effort to sound angry. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating, giving the weight of their actions time to sink in. "I left," I finally said, my voice even but carrying all the restraint I'd held for weeks, because I couldn't stand being lied to, being used, and being betrayed by the two people I trusted most. Her lips quivered. I can explain," she stammered, but I shook my head. "Explain. You slept with my brother a week before our wedding, while I was working overtime, paying off your debts. There's nothing left to explain." My words landed like stones in the quiet room, each syllable echoing with the raw truth she had tried to hide. Jake tried to step forward, to say something, anything, but I held up my hand. "Save it. I've heard enough from both of you. You'll figure out the rest on your own." The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner, the tension practically vibrating between us. I could see the guilt, the panic, the realization that their choices had consequences, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need tears, apologies, or explanations. Their panic, their embarrassment, their crumbling world IT was enough. And as I walked out that night, the cool night air brushing against my face, I felt the weight of betrayal finally lifting, replaced with a clarity I hadn't known I could feel, even as I left. I knew one thing: they would never forget this night, and neither would I. the silent reckoning had begun. And it was far more devastating than any argument or confrontation could have been by the following week. The consequences of their betrayal were impossible to ignore. Claire's frantic attempts to salvage her life were failing spectacularly. Friends stopped answering her calls. Family began questioning her choices. And even the wedding planners started raising concerns over missed deadlines and strange excuses. Every misstep she made was amplified because I was no longer there to smooth things over, to pick up the pieces. Watching from a distance, I could see her scrambling, trying to regain control and failing. And there was a grim satisfaction in knowing she was finally facing the reality she had ignored for so long. Jake was in a similar position. Without my presence to buffer the tension, his usual charm and wit did nothing to stop the scrutiny. Mutual friends whispered behind his back, noting the strange dynamic, the hidden tension that had always lurked under the surface. The arrogance that had carried him through life suddenly seemed childish, fragile, and exposed. For once, he couldn't talk or charm his way out of the mess they had created together. I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened the late nights, the financial sacrifices, the trust I had placed in them both. It hurt deeply, but there was also clarity in knowing that walking away had been the right choice. I didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. The unraveling of their world was punishment enough, a natural consequence that I could witness without lifting a finger. From afar, I watched Claire struggle with embarrassment, guilt, and the realization that her recklessness had consequences beyond what she could control. Jake's facade cracked as well, his confidence replaced with anxiety and shame. Every misstep, every awkward encounter, every whispered conversation reminded them me that trust, once broken, leaves a lasting mark by the end of the week. I felt a strange mix of relief and vindication. I had loved and sacrificed, but I had also protected myself. I had taken nothing out of anger, only ensured that I would no longer be collateral damage in their selfishness. And as I observed their downfall, I knew I was finally free to start rebuilding a life that didn't revolve around their betrayal. Months had passed since I vanished, and in that time, I rebuilt my life from the ground up. The emptiness I had felt in those first few days of walking away slowly transformed into clarity and strength. I focused on work, on friends who truly cared about me, and on hobbies I had neglected while wrapped up in Claire and Jake's chaos. Every small victory, whether paying off a lingering debt of my own, taking a weekend trip alone, or laughing without guilt, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had lost. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't need to. The collapse of their world had been punishment enough, and the universe had balanced the scales in ways I couldn't have orchestrated. I ran into mutual acquaintances now and then, hearing snippets of Claire's struggles and Jake's awkward attempts to rebuild his reputation. There was no gloating on my part, just a quiet satisfaction in knowing that I was no longer tied to their selfishness, no longer defined by their betrayals. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely proud of my own resilience. I realized that love, when it turns toxic, can be devastating. But walking away can be the most powerful form of reclaiming control. I had loved deeply, trusted completely, and sacrificed willingly, but I had also learned the importance of boundaries, self-respect, and the courage to let go when it matters most. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my apartment balcony, I reflected on everything that had happened. The pain, the heartbreak, the shock hit was all part of a story that had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. I smiled softly, feeling a peace I hadn't known was possible. I was free, empowered, and finally ready to embrace a life where my happiness didn't depend on anyone else's choices. Walking forward, I knew I carried the lessons of betrayal, loss, and silent justice with me, and in that knowledge, there was a quiet triumph. I had survived, I had healed, and I had taken back my life stronger, wiser, and untouchable. The chapter of Claire and Jake was over, but the story of me fully in control was only beginning.